In this section, we're going to start diving into theme development by working on a master project. This course focuses on developing a large theme and plugin. By doing so, you'll be given first-hand experience on what it takes to develop a large project. We got a taste of PHP in the last section. It's time to see how WordPress uses PHP to power a content management system. First things first, let's check out the files in our editor. Right away, you'll notice there are hundreds of files in WordPress. It can be daunting to decide where to begin. I think the best place to start is with the configuration file. It's one of the most important files in WordPress. At the heart of every WordPress site is the configuration file. Regardless of what you're doing, the configuration file is loaded on every request. Let's take a peek at what's inside. It can be found in the root directory of your WordPress installation. The file is called wp-config.php. The configuration file contains the core settings of WordPress. This information is highly sensitive. We can find info such as the database login credentials, security keys, etc. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the wp-config documentation page. This page provides documentation for WordPress's configuration file. It contains a comprehensive list of every option available. We're allowed to freely edit the configuration file without our changes being overridden. Updates will not affect the configuration file. We won't be able to cover most of these settings. The default settings are optimized for most WordPress apps. Normally, we would have to configure WordPress. Luckily, Local expedited this process for us. So you may be thinking, why are we starting with this file? As developers, we're inevitably going to be running into problems. It's completely natural. By default, WordPress disables debugging mode. While errors are helpful for developers, they can be incredibly dangerous to show to visitors. If a visitor is malicious, they can use the info from an error to hack our site. It's considered good practice to hide errors in a production environment. In our case, we're in a development environment. For the best possible development experience, we should enable WordPress's debug mode. On the sidebar, there's a link to an option called WP Debug. Let's click on it. According to the documentation, this option will allow errors to appear on the screen. In a production environment, this option should always be set to false. Since we're working locally, we should set this option to true. It's going to help us debug our code if we run into errors. Let's turn it on. Switch back to the editor. Immediately, we're going to be given dozens of lines of code. It can seem intimidating at first, but don't worry. Take a deep breath. If you were to read each line of code one by one, you're going to notice something. This file is filled with comments and constants, nothing you haven't encountered before. WordPress's configuration settings are defined with constants. The comments are to describe each setting. After all, WordPress is an open source project. The developers of the project try their best to keep the code base beginner friendly. Feel free to read through the comments. Let's take a look at the first constant. As we've learned, constants are created with the define function. In addition, constant names are written with all uppercase letters. It's a common practice among WordPress developers. Feel free to explore the constants in this file. You can always refer to the documentation for more info. In the next lecture, we're going to modify this file to help us with debugging WordPress.